Let's give a hand to our elected officials who are here listening to this conversation to protect people. A couple things that Michael had talked about. This map. Remember when in the very beginning of today we watched that video with Nancy Pelosi and Broomfield. He talked about the Convention on Biodiversity. That's this map. So when you talk to people about this map and you refer to that Agenda 21 C-SPAN video, this is what they're talking about. So it is not a conspiracy, it's fact. Holly Swanson's here. She's here to talk about executive order. Michael also mentioned the third document of Agenda 21 is the Earth Charter. Oregon's own Holly Swanson has written a book called Training for Treason. Michael mentioned a lot of signatories on the Earth Charter. At the back of Holly's book, which she has in her hand, you can see hundreds and hundreds of organizations and groups that have signed on to the United Nations Earth Charter. This is being taught in our schools. Schools right now are being pushed to have their students all across the United States endorse the United Nations Earth Charter. So Holly has some news. I know this has been a tough morning already, or a tough day already. It's a lot of tough news to hear, but knowledge is power. And that's why we're here, is to get educated so that we can go out and share all this information with our friends and our families so that they can help us stop this movement. This is Holly Swanson. How many are familiar with Holly Swanson? Great. So Holly Swanson has written a book called Set Up and Sold Out. This was written in how long ago?
1995.
1995, and it covers the Earth movement, or the environmental movement. And she'll talk a little bit more about that. But after Holly talks, we're going to do a quick break, and then but I'll hand it over to Holly for right now.
Thank you very much. Back in the late 80s, I got involved in looking into the political agenda of the environmental movement. And that's why I wrote this book. When I went to the conferences, I became very concerned about what was being said there by most of the mainstream environmental groups. And just very quickly, I'd like to share with you, back from 1990, what the Greens, and that is Green Party, Green Movement, one and the same, one giant blob of a movement that is advancing their political agenda under the guise of environmental protection. Back in 1990, these were the goals laid out by the Greens. Public ownership or government ownership, government control of land, abolish private property, government control of the healthcare industry, the energy industry, the auto industry, the railroad industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, and all natural resources. How many of those things have been chipped away at? How much have we seen public control in those areas? Quite a bit, right? Okay. Now, bringing this right up to speed, and as I said, I'm jumping from one to another, but they're all tied together, I assure you. How many of you have heard of President Obama's November 1st executive order? Okay, we all need to be aware of this, and it is the executive order preparing the United States for the impacts of climate change. Now, even though this issue has been heavily debated, and much of the consensus is now that we're actually seeing global cooling, President Barack Obama has taken it upon himself to issue a sweeping executive order to address this threat to our nation. And basically it says, it is hereby ordered, the impacts of climate change are already affecting natural resources, communities, ecosystems, economies, and public health, as well as species and habitats. Managing these risks requires the federal government to improve climate preparedness, basically to safeguard our economy, our infrastructure, our environment, and our natural resources. And let me read you this one section on natural resources just very quickly, because it is such a blank check and it involves every department in our government. Let me read this to you. Managing lands and waters for climate preparedness. Within 9 months of the date of this order, and in coordination with the efforts described in Section 2, the heads of the Department of Defense, the Interior, Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Army Corps of Engineers, and other agencies shall work to complete an inventory and assessment of proposed and completed changes to their land and water-related policies, programs, and regulations necessary to make the nation's watersheds, natural resources, and ecosystems resilient in the face of climate change. So, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And that's pretty much goes right across the board and affects everybody here living in this area. If you have ranches or you have a pond on that ranch or anything else, how many would agree that's a sweeping executive order to take control, inventory, manage these properties? And why this is so important is this has completely circumvented how much debate that went on about Kyoto and that protocol, and it wasn't passed. So this executive order has completely circumvented any congressional or senatorial oversight, any public input, and the idea to get it done within 9 months, that should make our hair stand on end, does it? Yeah. All right. So what can we do about this? Well, beyond impeaching him, which I think actually should occur, what I believe we need to do is understand what it means to each of us, and then what we can do in our local communities to take action toward changing this. One of the steps that we can take is to understand what this means. And part of the reason I wrote Training for Treason, the harmful political agenda behind education for sustainability, is that when you understand, first of all, our children are in harm's way. And Training for Treason is called to action to get this education for sustainability curriculum out of our schools. But I also wrote this in a broader sense because as we, as parents, grandparents, citizens, political leaders, pastors, read Training for Treason, when we understand what the curriculum is and what they are teaching our children, then we're going to understand exactly the direction the Greens have for our nation. And again, the political agenda of the Greens, the Green movement, also mirrors the goals of the Green Party. This is documented extensively in Training for Treason, and what we need to understand also is Green Party goals mirror communism. And that is a huge part of what we are dealing with. We need to be able to debate that on a policy level instead of just having environmental protection steps taken under the guise of sustainability or other words like climate change to basically erode our rights one step at a time. And I think we need to start looking at these issues through a political lens, not just an environmental lens. And again, when we understand the goals of education for sustainability, am I talking too fast or are we moving right along? Okay, very good. Okay, understanding when we're talking about education for sustainability agenda, this is to take over public education from preschool through university, use every subject every day to advance the goals of this political movement. This political movement began really with the help of Senator John Kerry and Teresa Heinz Kerry back in 1993 when they established Second Nature and have begun to push this curriculum to change the mindset of our children to accept basically changing our cultural, religious, social, economic, and political structure of our nation. How do you do that? If there's 89% of America's children that attend public schools, that's 89% of the future vote. You indoctrinate those children, you take control of the country. Make sense? Okay, so not only do we need to get this program out of our schools, we need to understand what the agenda means to us. And quickly, as climate change is a major part of the education for sustainability thrust, what does it mean in hard facts toward what they're teaching our children and what they're aiming for? Let me read you just a couple. Okay, one of the goals, consumption has been reduced by 75%. Okay, under this executive order, it is so broad and sweeping, we need to understand when you talk about consumption reduced by 75% and a huge emphasis on transportation and the idea that you don't want to use too much gas to bring food and supplies to different areas from long distances, then that can come into play there, can't it? Does that make sense? Okay, and so here's another one. Fossil fuels and materials in the economy has been reduced by 75%. That's a huge number. Can you imagine reducing your consumption by 75%? But if our children are indoctrinated to believe that in order to save the planet and in order to survive, they must reduce their consumption by 75%, and you start teaching a little child this when they're 5 and 6 years old, are they going to know the difference? No. They are going to be indoctrinated. Education for Sustainability is a political indoctrination program. And let me bring this right back to the executive order. The global climate, this is the goal of the Education for Sustainability movement. The global climate has been restabilized to the level it was in 1950 through a 75% reduction in fossil fuels. How many of you drove here today? Okay? How many of your farms and ranches and equipment rely on gas? Okay? Can you imagine running your operation with 75% reduction in fossil fuels, or replace all your equipment and your cars with an electric car? Could you survive? No. And that's the point. So this executive order is something that not only needs to be understood, and we need to talk to our elected officials, we need to get organized in our communities and make a concerted effort to do what it takes to, I mean, obviously an executive order has a certain power to it, but we also can follow different steps to take action to, I mean, as I said earlier, impeachment is a possibility. Between now and the next 9 months, one of the things we certainly can do, each and every one of us can do, is educate our friends and family. How many are willing to do that on this executive order? Would you? Exactly. We all need to do it together. And the other thing that we need to do, and we need to do it immediately, if not sooner, and I know I'm running quick on my time, but I'm finishing, is that we must get education for sustainability as a curriculum out of our schools. We are organizing on a national level through a coalition called We Choose Freedom. And We Choose Freedom is organizing with citizens across the nation. We'd like to get some organization going here in Klamath County to get this out of our schools, whether we suspend it or we expel it completely, because our children are being indoctrinated. And it's one of the most important issues of our time, because they will not understand what we understand in this room, and that is to cherish the value of our freedom. They will not learn this. They are learning to be globally aware, global citizens, and they are learning to accept an agenda that absolutely positively mirrors communism. And in a simple sense, there is a tremendous amount of detail and understanding about this movement, but in a simple sense, when we understand education for sustainability goals mirror Green Party goals, Green Party goals mirror communism. This is an agenda that we can do something about, but we've got to call a spade a spade. And as Michael was talking earlier, one of the points in Training for Treason, I would encourage each of you to get a book. It's only 150 pages. It's written so that you can underline it and understand it. And in the back of the book, there are 50 pages dedicated to all the organizations in the United States, state by state by state by state, that have endorsed the Earth Charter. And it's vitally important to understand, as Mikhail Gorbachev was a co-author of that document, it's no wonder that that document mirrors communism, and it is also no wonder that that document has been selected to teach our children the meaning of sustainability. In other words, simply politically indoctrinate them to accept green communism. So I know I've got a minute. I appreciate you listening fast. I will be here throughout the day. If you have any questions, come by and see me at the table. And like I say, onward and upward, together we can absolutely turn this around, but we have got to take immediate action in our schools, and this executive order is something we also must take immediate action on. We are empowered. We have a We Choose Freedom Coalition. Please join us. Thank you so much, Debbie and all.
Table is right over there. She's also available for speaking, and she'll bring her books, and you can organize with your groups to read the book and do trainings in your community. It's great. She's a fabulous speaker.